Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics and I'm going to go off-piste here. Very much unscripted. Been asked a few comments about the big news story, and it shouldn't be a big news story this week, is about the royal row. Meghan Markle and Harry against the rest of the royal family, really. I'm not going to get into social commentary. I would try and avoid like the plague social commentary, but there is an interesting political commentary slant now that Piers Morgan, I'll explain who he is in a moment, has left, because that raises an awful lot of things about accuracy on the arguments on both sides. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news in politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, what has effectively happened is the British media persecuted, and that is the right word, persecuted Meghan Markle relentlessly. And the accusation, now it's all blown up, the accusation has been that the British media are racist and they persecuted her for reasons of race. And here's the thing, and this is where I'm going to bring Piers Morgan. Now, for those who don't know who he is, you may be out of the country, probably if you are in the UK, you do know who he is. He's an objectionable sort, but he's also the only journalist who really put the government under pressure over the last year, over the pandemic. He really put ministers under the cosh. Very, very good at calling power to account when he wants to. And I said last year that he's basically a right-wing nut job, but he is good at what he does. And people would say things like, yeah, but he's calling these Conservative ministers to account more robustly than anyone else. And also, wasn't he like editor of The Mirror, which is a left-wing tabloid newspaper? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because he will take a job that pays well. He's very good at that job. He's a good journalist. But he's still a right-wing nut job. And bear in mind, in the past, he's written articles that have been homophobic. He's sexist. You know, he often talks over his female co-host, or former female co-host now because he's left. And he has also attacked Meghan Markle and you know, uncompromisingly. Even when she talked about suicidal feelings, he said he didn't believe her. And as people have pointed out, if someone says that, you don't even need to think if it's true or not, because if someone says that, that is a call for help somewhere. And also it may be true. And as other people have pointed out, how do you get someone to prove that? The end result is not good if they are telling the truth. You just automatically believe people. There is never any harm comes from not believing someone who makes that statement. I do understand that people can make statements in the media, and I don't know any of the players involved well enough to know on any particular statement whether it's the truth or not, if there is nothing to verify it. But at the end of the day, what harm is there in believing someone who ultimately wasn't telling the truth? None at all. But people have said because he's attacked her so much, that is also racism. And here's where we have to be a little bit careful, because it may be and it may not be. It's a bit like with some of the British media. Some of the articles may be that or they may not be. And I'll try and explain what I mean here. So there's a few little layers to this. So first of all, someone on social media was pointing out in terms of because the British media have got together and said that they're not racist. They are racist. And they got a load of headlines showing racism, 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 racism. Now, technically, some of those things weren't racism. Some of them were. Some of them weren't. Some of them were xenophobia. Now, here's the thing. I often will say something's racist when what I actually mean is xenophobic. Normally, I'm fairly careful about the way I use language. But for that particular case, there's a hell of a crossover between them. Now, you can have xenophobes who are not racist, and you can have racists who are not xenophobes. But by and large, if you're one, you're probably the other. And the reason for that is it stems from the same prejudice. It's all that tribalism, it's all that keep the outsiders out. But there are other forms of bigotry as well, which can also explain British media attacks, just outright persecution. It's not always racism, it's not always xenophobia, even though it can be in those cases, and inevitably some of the articles regarding Markle would have been. But you have, in Britain, you have this maddening class system. The people on the top refuse to let it die because they are the privileged few who see themselves at the top of this pyramid. You know, the likes of Boris Johnson, the likes of Nigel Farage, they went to posh public schools which is what we call private schools. We sometimes call them private schools as well. It's very confusing. They're not for the public. I don't know why they're called public schools. But anyway, high fee paying schools where they are taught that they are in a privileged position by right, and those schools, usually the very top schools like Eton, put a responsibility on their students to make sure they preserve that system for the next generation. You need to be the captains of industry. You need to be running the country, because otherwise the system will collapse. And they're taught that this system is great and good. And they're not going to argue with it, because that system puts them at the top of this pyramid. And you will also sometimes get people who are nowhere near the top of the pyramid who like it as well, because they believe that it heightens their status within this pyramid if they accept it. That's the typical conservative thinking. So you have other forms of bigotry as well. You have sexism. So you also it may be that some people just took the ump with Markle because she's not British. She's not from, if she were the same skin tone as she is, but she came from a privileged British background, she may not have got anywhere near the amount of abuse. It may not be down to just racism. It can be down to where they perceive you fit in this pyramid. And this is where Piers Morgan comes in. Why did Piers Morgan attack her so much? He actually had a bit of a grudge against her, because apparently at some social, he didn't feel that she was giving him enough attention. Piers Morgan is a very brash man. He likes to be the big I am. He likes to be the centre of attention. So you go to a little social event and someone's not treating you as the centre of attention, he takes the ump. He takes it as a personal affront. And the thing, because he'll see himself within this pyramid. He may not see himself at the very top. Like if someone like the Prime Minister, for example, or the Queen were to not give him every attention, well, that's fine, because he understands he's below them in the pyramid. Someone like Meghan Markle might not even be the colour of her skin. Brash American, doesn't come from this system. She's way down. I'm above her in the pyramid. I should be getting attention from her. I shouldn't be being ignored because I'm a boorish loudmouth. And it's just that. It's just that. He may be racist and his attacks may be partially racially motivated. He is definitely sexist and his attacks may certainly be based on sexism. But the bottom line is it doesn't always have to be racism. It doesn't always have to be sexism. Like you take an example like, say, Diane Abbott. Diane Abbott is the most abused MP. I mean, that's just a fact. The amount of abuse she receives and has received over the years is ridiculous. And she highlights why it sort of harms us all when people behave like this as well. She was the first black woman MP in Westminster. And she receives racist abuse, sexist abuse, abuse because she's left-wing. She's got the trifecta of hate in the media. And a lot of that abuse is racism. But the thing is, white women in Westminster get a lot of abuse as well. Or they're ignored, which is a more passive form of abuse, or mansplained to. That's why at the last election, a lot of people stepped down because of the toxic atmosphere in general at Westminster, but a hell of a lot of women stepped down. A hell of a lot, because they get it much, much worse. And that's what I mean. You get all this, there's different types of bigotry which can sometimes explain it. And when people go, oh, you're abusing a black woman, it must be because she's black. It's almost like other people have this hierarchy of bigotry, and they always assume that whichever one's highest on the list is the reason for it. Oh, well, racism's worse than sexism or more prevalent or whatever they want to say. Therefore, if someone's black, it must be racist abuse. Not necessarily. And the same with some of the articles against Meghan. They just abused her because. Some of them, it was because of her race. Some of them, it's because she was a woman who spoke her mind. Some of them, it's just because she was an American. And that's all there was to it. That was it. People were talking about her in the same tones as, say, Yoko Ono, in terms of, oh, you're splitting up the Beatles, saying the same thing. And the other thing I'll just finish off with, because Piers Morgan, I wouldn't have done this otherwise were it not for the Piers Morgan angle, because he is a very, very fascinating creature. He is a bigot. He is a loudmouth. As a person, he's obnoxious, and we could do without him. But at the same time, There were other journalists who would also have done a good job of taking down the government, but they very often didn't get to interview ministers. Ministers tended to boycott them. Now, they did boycott Piers Morgan after a while as well, and then started doing interviews more recently with him. So he was the main one for completely calling out government ministers on their pandemic response. He was the shining beacon. Not necessarily the best at it, but in terms of the ones who got the opportunities, he was the most effective. And it's this strange dichotomy because people are confused by this, because people regard a person as either fundamentally good or fundamentally bad. Piers Morgan was absolutely brilliant at taking down Conservative ministers. He's a superb journalist, but he's a terrible human being. And people don't like to put those two together, and they have to decide that either the terrible human being means forget about the journalistic skill, or the journalistic skill, because it was so lacking in terms of holding government to account, excuses the terrible things. Neither is true. He is a terrible person, and it's right that he would face the consequences. And here's where, part of the terrible person is, the reason he left is because he couldn't take criticism himself. He had the nerve to quote Churchill, who was saying, the thing about free speech is everyone talks about it, but they also think it means the right to say exactly what they want, free from criticism. No, it's not. As other people point out, free speech is about being able to say what you want. But at the same time, if other people say, I don't agree with that, piss off, well, they're not blocking your free speech. They're just telling you that what you're saying is unacceptable. And they also have a right to freedom of expression. But it is an interesting one, very interesting, because perfectly encapsulated, you've got this situation, you've got a terrible man who did good things and deliberately did good things, and he'll do bad things, because now that he's left Good Morning Britain, he will inevitably end up working. We've got 2 new news channels supposed to be coming online, 2 extreme right-wing Fox News wannabes coming into the UK. He will inevitably get a job in one of those, and hope that he doesn't mess it up like the last time he worked on the proper Fox News in America. But there we go. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. We'll be on to Brexit again tomorrow. Hope you found the video interesting anyway. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.